Okay. Call to order the January 13th, 2022, 9 a.m. meeting of the Resiliency Coastal Communities Program Community Action Team Workshop here in Town Council Chambers. I'd like to start the meeting with call to order and Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The first item, or item number 2 on the agenda, is old business. I don't believe we have old business, unless you can correct me, Chad. And I would submit, if anybody has any agenda changes or revisions that they want to suggest for this present agenda, we can entertain them.
Yeah, and that's my fault. It probably all needs to just, for the record, just be changed to new business items 1 or A, B, and C.
Okay.
So that would be the only recommended change.
Okay. I'm going to recommend that old business be struck from the agenda. Can I have a second on that?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Going to new business, item A, review and comments on draft risk vulnerability assessment dated December 21st, 2001, as submitted to the town of Sunset Beach by our consultant, Moffett and Nichols. Chad, you want to start the discussion, and then
Sure.
I'd like to add some things, please.
Sure. I will. You have in front of you, and we're given to you on the 21st of December, 21st or 22nd, the draft version of the risk vulnerability assessment provided and prepared by Moffett Nickel and her team. Pete, you had some questions, and you want me to turn it over to Dawn first, or do you want me to? How do you want me to do that? I can let you ask the questions. Ultimately, I want to turn this over to Dawn,
Okay.
and then we can get into specifics if that's okay.
Dawn, it's really up to you. I have some specific questions that I'd like to run by you, and then you'd have an opportunity to address us with them. Or if you have an opening remark, then certainly proceed.
Well, I think it might be best. We do have our team here, and we do have a short presentation. We will review parts of the risk and vulnerability assessment, and perhaps at that point in time, we can discuss any comments or questions. Would that be okay with you?
That's fine. That's fine. Proceed.
Okay. And do you mind, Chad, if we record this so it can be provided on the website later?
Not at all. I think Alan's recording it as well, okay. The YouTube channel, so it's already being recorded.
Perfect. All right. And we don't need to do anything. Well, I'm going to ask Rachel to share the presentation with you, unless you guys are already seeing it on one of your screens.
So quickly, before we get started, Mackenzie Todd from Division of Coastal Management is in the waiting room. I don't know if you have the ability to see her, let her in.
Hey, Rachel, can you hear me?
Hey, you got in. Perfect.
Hey, yes, I'm in. I'm the 704 number. It's me and Tancred on the line. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Perfect. Good. Okay. Well, Rachel, if you want to share the presentation, and we'll get started. Really appreciate everyone having us this morning. This is our third and final community action team meeting that we have scheduled. Of course, there is always time to get together later informally if there are additional comments or questions or needs or support that you need from us. But just to do a quick round of introductions, I'm just going to let you know who all is on the call, and then we'll move forward. Of course, as you just heard, we have Tancred and Mackenzie from the Resilient Coastal Communities Program from the Division of Coastal Management. We have myself, of course, as you know, Dawn York, Project Manager, Robinson, our hazard mitigation technical director. We have Aisha Karanti, who is supporting us on the risk and vulnerability assessment. She's a coastal engineer. We also have Amanda Zullo, who you've heard from previously, who is directing our community outreach, and Rachel Baker, an environmental scientist, who's been working with us, again, on the risk and vulnerability assessment, but also supporting all of our GIS efforts. And I'd like to introduce Samantha Martinson, who is our new coastal scientist in our Wilmington office, who's been just recently working with us, our team, to support us on the project portfolio deliverable for Sunset Beach. And just to do a quick rewind and review of the scope of work, the program steps through phase 1 and 2. Just to make sure, I guess, are you able to see the screen or see the presentation?
Yeah, I was just about to ask Chad. Looks like the screen sharing has been disabled. Is there a way you could give me permission on Zoom to go ahead and share that?
Alan. Yeah, Alan's working on it, my IT guy. Bear with me just a second.
No worries.
Okay, well, while we work on that, I'll just keep moving forward. And also, Chad, we did email you the PDF of the presentation if you want to just use that to share whatever your preference is.
Okay, you should be able to share it now.
Okay.
And just to, again, do a rewind of the phase 1 steps, we've already completed steps 1 through 6 under phase 1, which is, as you'll note, developing a community action team, which the planning board has served as that role. We really appreciate all your support and the time and effort that you guys have put into this. Mike has worked with you to develop a vision statement and goals, of which have been developed and finalized. We'll review those quickly here in a few minutes. We have worked with Chad and other staff to review your existing local plans and efforts and develop a summary of those that will go into the overall resilience strategy. Amanda's been working with your group as well as Lisa and others to develop a community engagement strategy. As you know, we've held a public meeting, we created the website, and Lisa's been working diligently to keep that updated. Rachel and others have been, and Aisha have been working with staff to map critical assets and natural infrastructure. And then, as you know, you've received a draft of the risk and vulnerability assessment, and we're looking forward to receiving your feedback today. And then, of course, in the next phase, which we would also like to discuss with you as well, is to, we've already drafted based on your initial feedback and some of the comments we've heard from the public as well as staff, a suite of potential strategies or solutions that could be moved forward into future phasing with additional grant funding. And of course, we can have a discussion later this morning on how Sunset Beach would like to consolidate and prioritize those potential projects. So we'll move on to the next slide. And again, just as a review of the schedule, we have come quite a long way in a short amount of time. Again, we're wrapping up this project probably, if we can, by the end of January. Otherwise, we'll kind of go into early February to finalize the report. And again, I am happy, if we want to have another meeting to discuss additional items on the projects or such, I can, make myself and our team available if need be. Next slide, please. And again, just as a reminder, the deliverables is that risk and vulnerability assessment report. We'll integrate your feedback, and we will finalize the project portfolio based on our discussion today and any other additional feedback we receive from staff and the community action team. And then, of course, we will wrap up the GIS map package and provide all of this in a resilience strategy memo and package to the town as well as the Division of Coastal Management. Our intent is to complete everything by the end of February, but if we can wrap it up earlier, we certainly will do so. Next slide, please. And then next is just again a reminder of our previous vision statement and goals that Mike worked with you through, and this is just a kind of a help refresh your memory as to what the discussion was and the agreement as to how to kind of wrap the resiliency planning effort into a kind of long-term vision to support staff planning and the community's commitment to becoming more resilient. So I'm not going to read this for you. If you wanted to take just a moment to read refresh your memory on what was agreed upon. And Rachel, if you don't mind moving on to the next slide, and we'll quickly review the goal statements. You know, again, it's really to focus on resilience, you know, making sure the community has that ability to provide input and making sure our staff and our elected officials are informed. And certainly, again, the training, providing resources and equipment, reducing risk, working with partners, whether it be at the state level, the federal level, or at the local level. And then I think one of the most critical and important pieces is that last goal statement is to protect and conserve the town's most important natural infrastructure assets, your marsh, your wetlands, your beaches, the floodplains. All right, so I'm going to now pass it on to Aisha, who's going to review with you just a summary of the risk and vulnerability assessment and kind of what went into that and what the results were. And certainly, I would say, you know, maybe let her go through her summary, and then we can open it up to questions at that time and ask for your feedback then. So, Aisha.
Thank you, Dawn. So we use the method adopted by CDC to determine the social vulnerability for the census blocks throughout the town. And that method uses 15 different indicators and looks at the vulnerability under 4 different themes. So it looks at socioeconomic status. So it is mainly about employment, the income. The second theme is the household composition, which looks at the vulnerable population. So like age 65 and older would be a vulnerable population, for example. The third theme is about minority status and language. So we looked at minorities and people who speak English less than well, according to the census. And then our last theme is housing and transportation, in which we are trying to see if a disaster happens, people can move or so. That is basically about the housing and transportation vulnerabilities. And then we rank the census blocks within the town against each other. We can see from these maps, we can see under each team which census blocks are more vulnerable. The darker colors indicate higher vulnerability, which, I mean, the concerning parts are more to the south because we know it is also physically more vulnerable at Sunset Beach when you are near the ocean. Obviously, flooding will be of concern. After we did this, we also, at the next slide, combine all these teams together to develop the overall vulnerability. And here we can see like the darkest color again is the highest vulnerability. So when we are developing projects, we should consider those areas at higher vulnerability as priorities. The next thing we did was to also look at our critical facilities and how exposed they are to the disasters, the natural hazards that we defined in our project. So we looked at flooding, storm surge from different category hurricanes, and we looked at sea level rise. And we looked at we only had 3 critical facilities, and only the fire station 1 seems to be vulnerable. It is vulnerable to category 4 and storm surge from category 4 and 5 hurricanes. And after that, now we are going to be moving to creating a vulnerability score for these critical assets. We can move to the next slide. Thank you, Rachel. So the vulnerability score is basically the exposure score, so which will come from the previous table. Exposure scores, how exposed your facilities to an hazard. Then we have our sensitivity score, which is a degree to which the resources function can, like, impaired by hazard exposure. If you can move all its function to another building when a hazard is coming, that sensitivity score would be low. And the third thing that we have is the adaptive capacity. So it shows if that building or asset has some functions, I don't know if you can move it on piles, if it can, the whole building or whole facility can be moved, or if it is flood walls, its adaptive capacity would be high. And putting them all together, so adding the exposure score to our sensitivity score and removing the adaptive capacity score will give us the overall vulnerability score for a critical asset. So in the next slide, we are going to be sending a small homework about this, but basically we will give scores, and in that exercise that we will send and then determine our vulnerability scores for these assets.
All right, thank you, Aisha. I can go ahead and take over unless anyone has any questions following those slides Aisha just went over.
Yeah, let's stop there and ask the community action team. Chad, I don't know if you have the questions or if we want to open it up to the board. And
I can open it up to the board, the chairman.
Thank you, Chad, and thank you for the presentation, Moffett Nichols. We appreciate it. The report has a lot of data in it that is extremely useful to our town, not only in this situation with the RCCP program, but we're moving ahead with rewriting our Unified Development Ordinances. We're going to be in the process in the near future of rewriting our CAMA land use plan. And the data that's in here is going to be very useful. Vacant land, marsh land, parks, recreation, commercial, etc. But it'll be a great resource, particularly in those the CAMA land use plan rewrite. As I look through the executive summary and then further into section 3, hazard identification, the thing that jumped out at me immediately was we're talking about hazard identifications of flooding, storm surge, and sea level rise. But what I found was missing, to me it was quite obvious, is high winds and wind damage. When we look at the public survey that we did, there are several of the items that were responded or brought up by or answered by our citizens. And the second most popular one, with almost 55% experience levels from our citizens, was wind damage. that to me is something that should have been highlighted in the report and given its own section. I look at it as being extremely important. I don't want to say more important than sea level rise, but certainly the consequences and the histories that we've seen so far would rank it much higher than sea level rise. So I'd like Moffett and Nichols to address that, but as another point, because they may be able to combine a number of these things that I'm going to mention. There was a really, I thought was a great data point brought up on your page 13 of your report under community assets. And it talked about, I'll just read it because to me this is extremely important in us, let's call it pre-qualifying our projects to the DCM. More than 70% of our wetlands have been rated as exceptional significance in terms of water quality, wildlife habitat by the North Carolina Coastal Region Rating Evaluation. And that is a perfect segue into us selecting projects because that's something that the Coastal Region has already rated as being really one of our assets and of exceptional significance. I was confused at the report, the Risk and Vulnerability Assessment Report, in the format because I'm also looking at the handbook and the ways that that DCM has set up the program. I'm sure everybody on the community action team would like to speak. We're not going to repeat each other's comments, but I'd like John Farrell to maybe give you a couple minutes of, because he and I have had some conversations about the format of this assessment with regards to the handbook that we were given, let's call it the rules and regulations for how we're going to submit our data.
Thank you, Pete. From the beginning, our direction has been to follow the planning handbook, and the CAT spent a lot of time and effort to survey the community and find areas of risk and vulnerabilities, which we documented and were provided to Moffett and Nichol.
John, let me interject. We did, all of us got together in individual teams and went out independently through the town, communicated, talked, met with town staff, met amongst each other. And we developed an exhaustive list of projects, of vulnerabilities, and that's what John is referring to. But we submitted that through our town staff back no later than the beginning of November. And it just seems as we read the vulnerability report that's absent, as if you hadn't looked at it yet, or it wasn't appropriate to look at it yet. And I think that's where John is going with.
Well, in the handbook, in step 5, there is a very clear template provided for documenting that information. And using that information in step 6 of the handbook, there are 3 other templates in step 6A, 6B, and 6C. And these are highlighted in the report as being absolute requirements of the DCM as part of this process. And when we look through the draft report we have, we can't find that information. I think the narratives, as Pete said, the narratives in the report are very helpful. There's a lot of good information there, but there's a lot of data-specific things that appear to be required by the DCM before we move forward and get consideration for grants to complete any of these projects that come up. So that was the initial overview that I had when I read the report.
Do you have anything else to add, John? And we can maybe go through the panel here and then allow Moffett and Nichols to maybe look at the totality of our questions and respond.
I think that sums it up in an abstract manner, and let's hear from the other members.
Sybil?
let me wait, pass.
John, comments?
My concern on the whole risk assessment was that it was very, excuse me, very much at a macro or strategic level. I mean, most of us could sit down and look at a map of Sunset Beach and the floods, and we can come up with the flood zones, the vulnerable areas, and those types of things. And what is lacking, I think, and I agree with John, is how you transition from the macro analysis down to, what are the areas that we can actually identify and take action on with specific projects. What are the types of projects? And so this macro strategic level did not apply any of the detailed analysis that the committee provided earlier on. And so I'm very curious how we make that transition in so that we can then do something that is the real practical reality of this thing. Is our objective is to be able to come up with several concrete projects that we can propose to get grant and assistance to go ahead and complete. And those things that we cannot do with concrete projects, we will have, if you will, a laundry list of other areas that need to be addressed by the town to protect the community and the citizens and the environment that the town can work on over the years. And so that big step of going from macro down to what we can do with this seems to be missing.
Thank you, John. Ron?
Likewise, I guess I have no argument with anything anyone said. John, on the process, I think covered it from. I agree that the process doesn't seem to be matching the requirements early enough. And then overall, I certainly concur with Pete on the hazard identification. I found that to be, again, missing. You can argue whether the sea level rise should be in there. I would probably argue that that is just an amplifier to flooding and storm surge and not a separate hazard. But missing wind event to me seems to be a rather large hole in this assessment. As Pete did say, we went ahead and we surveyed the community, and again they came up with let me get to the right tab here. The second most highest thing was wind damage, and then there's further down, I think in 12 or 13 or 14 other wind damage events that they were concerned about. And then if you look at some other ones, impassable roads and down tree and utility, you could say that those concerns were really wind related. And if my memory serves me right, the report does talk about Hurricane Isis, but if my memory serves me right, didn't a tornado pass over this building during that event and knock down some trees?
Yes, it did.
Even though there was no storm surge from that particular event. So, and we all know what happened at Ocean Ridge. We had tornado. So it seems like not only that the wind event, not only hurricane related, tropical winds or straight line winds, tornadic winds, that there are certainly many vulnerabilities. And as John said, and Pete said, when I looked through the notes that we did on our little mini team assessments, yes, many of them were flood and storm surge. I agree, those are obviously key, but many of them were also wind hazard vulnerability. So to me, missing that is, huge. So, and I don't know how to fix it, I guess in the time permitted, other than saying what it would take to add a section 3.4 wind event, and then whatever flows from it to this report, and have it done by February 10th or something.
I'm going to ask a question too, and I'll turn it to John and Sybil. You still haven't had an opportunity. This report, it's a draft, obviously. And I guess the question, I don't expect you to answer it right now, but the question kind of looms this needs to fall, is the Division of Coastal Management going to look at whatever assessment report is submitted on our behalf by Moffett Nichols and say, hold it, it didn't follow the handbook. We wanted certain things, I's dotted and T's crossed, going back to what John Farrell had said. So that obviously is a concern. And hopefully Ron's suggestion of adding in wind hazard to the report, I think would be key to at least satisfying us as to what we see as the true vulnerabilities here in our town. John, you had your hand up.
Just one kind of a suggestion that may be, again, part of this clarification, simplification process on section 4.1.1, the community assessment. You've got the natural hazard inventory.
Are you in the vulnerability report?
It's in the vulnerability report, yes.
What page?
12.
Page 12.
Thank you.
It was hidden by my ink here. 17 different items, and it really looks kind of confusing when you go through the respondents and what the numbers are. But if you take those and consolidate them into 4 areas, you'll see sort of help us focus on what's going on. There were 3 items that addressed road problems and accessibility. There were 3 items that addressed wind damage. There's one main one that addressed storm surge, and there's some just general flooding that goes into there. And there were at least 4 items that discussed utilities. So, you know, when we look at how we're going to come up with a program, we can sort of focus in our priorities, if you will, is addressing how do we take care of our roads and accessibility. We lose our roads, we can't get out of here, and you know, rescue support units can't get in. But overall, wind damage we talked about, storm surge we talked about, and the utilities. All of them have different factors, different ways that they get handled. But I think those would help us focus in on how we're going to move towards our, I guess, project portfolios, what we're going to handle.
And I'd submit, John, bootstrapping off of what you just said, loss of telephone service, loss of cell phone service are typically wind-related issues. Trees come down on wires and you lose your power.
And electricity.
Yeah, and those fall into the utility area, and just in a quick, perhaps overly superficial look at, those are things that, you know, we have assets, we bring in assets to fix and repair after a storm, the recovery type of mode real quickly. And it's, you know, not necessarily the project that we're going to be able to do to prepare for the storms, other than, you know, we've got things underground that
it's
we
nothing
can't do.
we can do here.
Yeah.
It's done by the utility company.
And we go to outside assistance to keep
Right.
those things
Good
running.
point.
For once,
John, are you finished?
Yeah.
Simple,
beg
please.
your pardon. For once, it's not the girls talking the most. I agree with all of these guys. I mean, everything is spot on. And I do see that our biggest issues are storm surge, obviously. We live on the coast, and the wind. And I think even more than the ones they pointed out are wind related. How do we fix wind?
Well,
Well, we become more resilient to
Right.
deal with the wind. But
Yes.
you can't stop the wind.
Right. And so I think we've been given lots of information about what our past has been and what our future looks like, but we don't have a direction of what to get to make this better.
I guess as an add-on comment, and unless we identify it as a hazard and the vulnerabilities, I don't see how we can come up with a project then that solves it and expect approval. Now, some of these wind things may be hard, as John said, that they're utility related, and we can't, but there's things we can do. We have enough backup generators, backup communication systems.
Yeah.
I mean, there's other things that maybe are projects that warrant spending money on and doing, but if we don't include it, to me, and maybe John Farrell can answer, if we don't include this properly in our hazard identification and risk and vulnerability assessment, we can't put that project on the list because we didn't identify it in the first place. I mean, the project has to be a solution to a risk or a vulnerability. So
There's a couple things. We want to be comfortable that the vulnerability assessment is in conformance with what the DCM is going to accept. And I anticipated that by this third meeting, which we're in today, that we would have already had, let's call it a list of from the projects that we have already worked up, that we would have a list. And I think some of the other towns have, at their third meeting, have had such a list already. But what I'm at the loss for is, I know we have an exhaustive list of potential projects that if we deal with it, it'll help our resiliency, which is the whole point of this program. However, we're not talking about any of them yet. And I'm a little frustrated because I want to talk about projects.
Do you mind if I interrupt you? I'm really sorry.
Go ahead,
hard
Dawn.
to not be in the room. You guys brought up some really great points, but we haven't completed our presentation, and the next step is to review with you the projects. So I hear you when you say that you are frustrated, you want to talk about projects, and so do we. And that is the next step in our presentation that we would love to share with you. But before we get to that, I'd like to just briefly address some of the comments that you guys have made. And I do thank you for your time and review of the document and appreciate your comments. There's a couple things, and I didn't write them all down, but I think one of the main concerns is that the risk and vulnerability assessment did not follow the DCM handbook. And I would like to just note that this risk and vulnerability assessment is similar in template and in format as to other risk and vulnerability assessments that have been developed under this program and have been reviewed by DCM. So we will be sure to go back into the handbook and also work with Mackenzie and Tancred to ensure that we have not missed any significant steps. So I apologize in advance if that is the case. But we too want to make sure that we follow the handbook, for which we have done every step of the way. So we will confirm with DCM, and I don't know if Mackenzie and Tancred, if you're on the line and want to address that at this point or add anything.
Hey, Dawn, this is Mackenzie. I have personally not had the opportunity to review the Sunset Beach risk and vulnerability assessment yet. I don't know if it's been sent to me, and if it has, I'm sorry if I missed it in my email, but that's going to be on my list tomorrow to review to ensure that it is indeed following the steps within the handbook, which is, of course, what we intend when we created that planning handbook, that each of those steps would be met. There's minimum requirements for each step, and we're going to be hoping to see those, that data incorporated within that assessment. So I just haven't had the chance to review the Sunset Beach one yet.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, we'll make sure that you get it if you hadn't already. Apologies if it hadn't been sent to you. So, and of course, and just as a note, the handbook is a kind of a guiding document. Some items within it may not apply to Sunset Beach. It may apply to another community and not apply to Sunset Beach. So again, we've done our best to follow those steps, but again, maybe perhaps not everything is specifically tailored for a community such as Sunset Beach. With that said, with the wind hazard, and I'll ask Mike to address this as well. I know early on, perhaps it might have been the first community action team meeting that we had. We did specifically focus on critical assets and the types of hazards, that we would be addressing in the risk and vulnerability assessment. And flood hazard certainly was the top priority that could be addressed, given the program budget and time frame. So I'm going to ask Mike. I know he has a little bit more experience on how best to incorporate wind. I certainly agree that wind could be addressed, but how best to analyze it within the vulnerability analysis is another question. So Mike, I don't know if you have any input right now on that.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Don. The point I would make is that there are wind hazard maps available for the East Coast and Eastern North Carolina. One thing that I've observed about that is that they do tend to be fairly large swaths, I guess I would call them, in terms of the detail that you see with the wind zones, those wind hazard areas. They're not typically as detailed as the flood insurance rate maps where you see specific boundaries. So we can go back and look and see where those lines are, and if there is kind of a logical break between this portion of the town would be exposed to these mile per hour winds versus these mile per hour winds, and what may be more vulnerable. But with a smaller planning area, those maps tend to be more valuable for regional plans or statewide outlooks. We can look and see how much detail there is. But as far as getting onto building specifics and determining, roof type and elevation of structures, that may potentially be an opportunity for a more detailed study to determine, for wind loads and things like that, what may need to be done to really get down to some site and building specific information. But I don't think it would be hard to address it in terms of recognizing the wind hazard and some of the high level concerns. But then that might sort of, beg the question, well, why didn't you follow that through down to, the same level of detail that we tried to get to with the flood hazard and the flood zones and storm surge and sea level rise and things like that. So I know that's not a definitive answer. We can go back and we can talk about it as a team and look at the data and look at what we can try to do. But I think, it's looking at another hazard type on kind of on top of what we have done so far with the water-based hazards, the flood-related hazards.
But Mike, doesn't, my memory serves me right, I mean, you list out on table 1 a number of events, obviously many of them hurricane related, but I believe the National Weather Service has the wind field for all those storms to where they're above tropical level. And I believe the National Weather Service also can provide tornado tracks for any rated tornado event. So it seems like that information will be available and can be overlaid on our existing maps that you already got.
Right, and I think the key with that is just going back at what we set out to do initially, because I don't think that tornado was on the list of hazards that we, and again, it's something we can kind of go back and talk about, but again, the emphasis I think from the beginning was on the flood hazard, not saying that wind and tornado, drought, wildfire, all those things may be valid. I think that the first step was focusing on the framework and the approach and the template kind of for flooding. But again, Don and I can talk about that and work with Mackenzie on, how many hazards, we want to address with this and with the time and resources that are available, what can be done.
Can I add a comment, please? My concern, and the wind example is pretty good. We really don't need wind maps to tell us that anytime we have a hurricane coming through, we're going to have high winds and damages. And you look around our area, we have areas with lots of trees. We know that wind also affects the storm surge to a bit. The point is, it is a hazard to this area, to the whole community. And so the question becomes, what is it that we can do in our mitigation process that we can prepare for those wind events to mitigate the damage and then if necessary, go through the recovery. That's
That's the point.
That's the point of this.
The point
Yeah.
of this thing is how to bounce back, okay? And if we can identify yes, an air event is a little harder to quantify than a water event because the air is all over and water ain't. We went out and we asked the population to do a survey. They gave us their thoughts, and it seems we're kind of ignoring it because it's not convenient.
Your point, both of your points, I think, are excellent. I don't think the report under hazard identification needs to show maps and charts, or at least maps, as to what areas are going to be most vulnerable. We can make the argument that we have parts of the town where mobile homes are more plentiful, and other places where the building codes, because of stick-built homes, are more substantial and would withstand higher hurricane winds. But it needs to be identified as a hazard, even though its quantification may be done with a different formula.
Yeah, not all wind events going to be hurricane related.
Right.
I mean, you could have no flooding, no storm surge, no hurricane, and you could still have a severe wind event. I mean, we've seen that in other places in the country. We've had them here.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we kind of get a little hurricane centric here for obvious reasons.
Mike, we kind of stole
we
stole your time. Not to interrupt. Do you want to continue, Mike?
No, that's fine. All this is good conversation, and I think one point I would make, if it does help ease in anyone's minds at this point, just in terms of where we are overall, you do still have wind acknowledged and addressed in your regional hazard mitigation plan. So I know that this is a different program; it's a different agency sort of leading that, but we do, that is captured in your regional hazard mitigation plan as far as all of the wind hazards, hurricane, tornado, the entire all hazard or multi-hazard approach. So I think, again, it just goes back to, the scope of what we're trying to do here now by the end of the month, and that sort of thing with this particular document. So again, we can work with Mackenzie, and Don and I can talk and look at what can be done to expand this, what the ultimate reach of this is intended to be. And part of this, I go back, and Mackenzie, not to put you on the spot, but kind of the scope of this in terms of all hazard approach, because we could look at 3, but there are probably at least 17 or 18 hazards that would be applicable. So kind of how far do we want to go on the all hazard approach versus focusing in on the flood hazard initially, and then moving forward with additional hazards maybe down the road. So I think that's all that I know. That's not a great answer. It's probably not what you're hoping to hear, but just to kind of keep the conversation going, I think those are some of the points that I would make, at least at this point. And then again, hopefully as we move forward through the rest of the presentation and the process, maybe we'll continue to kind of touch on a few of these things as we go along.
Well, Mike, and that's true, but things like wildfires are not. We're not susceptible. We're not as vulnerable to that as other areas would be. But certainly, wind hazard is key. It's absolutely key. Enough said.
I guess maybe we should ask, I don't know if we can ask the folks that kind of designed the program. I mean, is this program designed just to be a water hazard resiliency program or an all hazard resiliency program? If the handbook and stuff is really a water hazard resiliency program, then I agree with Moffett. Then these other ones need to be not included. So I don't know if those folks can comment on that. On the program, really, we misinterpret it. It's just a water hazard and water-related hazard resiliency program, and all the other ones should not be included in this.
Hey, this is Mackenzie with DCM. Can I jump in for a second?
Please.
Sure.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, our intention with this program is, of course, the flood hazards, but also just your main hazards that you face as a community. So if Sunset Beach is saying that wind is a main hazard, then that would be something that would make sense to be included in the report.
Thank you. Okay, Dawn?
Yes, yes, and I guess there was, I think, one of the most pressing comments and most abundant comment that I heard was the sort of the windshield survey that was conducted by the community action team. And Chad and I spoke about this, I want to say either earlier this week or last week. I had sent an email. We do not have that, the results of the windshield survey. Unfortunately, I don't know who sent it. If it was sent to us, I do apologize.
I don't know what you're talking about. Can you please clarify what you mean by a windshield survey? It's not the public survey that we did with our citizens, is it?
No, sir, it's the community action team did a field assessment. We went out into pairs and documented.
Yes, that was done back in October.
October, November. I know I sent you emails with my copy of it. And I sent it to Chad and Moffett. And my email when it was sent through, and that was, I don't know when it was. I guess October, November.
I have it
John,
here.
do you remember?
It was earlier than that, earlier.
It was in October.
Okay.
I could dredge up the emails and resend them, but I'm pretty sure they got them.
Our October 7th meeting included those in the packet.
Okay, yeah, we don't have a copy of the packet, but I will look back through my emails. I'm doing that right now. And I apologize if we didn't get it. I had asked Chad to resend it. However, moving forward, if you don't mind, we can continue with the presentation and focus on the remaining slides, and then that could be where we discuss additional projects that could be identified, or provide additional information for the ones that we do have listed. If that's okay with you to keep moving forward.
Please.
Okay. Rachel, do you want to take on the next phase?
Sure, thank you, Dawn. And I apologize for the technical difficulties earlier when I dropped out. My computer is just having some difficulties, but I do appreciate the conversation that you all are having and your thoroughness and level of detail in reviewing this document. I do appreciate you all taking the time to provide such detailed feedback. One of the things that I heard that really stuck out to me was your concern for kind of taking this strategy-based macro analysis approach of our draft report and utilizing it in a way that we can have more of a level of detail for concrete projects and identifying concrete next steps. And that's really what I want to talk about now is how we are going to use this risk and vulnerability assessment report as a reference for you all as staff members for finding funding sources, for looking at really how to prioritize your needs and concerns location-wise throughout the town, hazard and vulnerability-wise throughout the town. So I want to move into phase 2, how we take the resources that we have put together thus far, including this assessment, and use that for planning and prioritizing projects. So phase 2, as I said, is moving into project prioritization. So really our objective, I'm not going to read this word for you all, but our objective is to not only identify previously mentioned ideas for potential projects, things that we have discussed in our previous CAT meetings, public meeting, as well as the town's existing documents, planning programs, and previous efforts. But also we want to move forward and look at new innovative solutions that we could explore and include on top of these previously identified project ideas. So we are going to organize these ideas into a project portfolio, which we have started to do, and we will show to you all.
You froze.
Rachel may have lost her connection. So I will continue on for her. Sorry about that. First of all, we did some digging while Rachel was talking, and it turns out that Chad had sent the October 7th package to Mike, who did forward it on to me, but it was not provided to the rest of the team. So my apologies. We do have that information. So it looks like we do have as of September 29, some meeting minutes and projects that were discussed at that point. So certainly we will go back and make sure that gets integrated. But I believe what Rachel was walking through were some of the strategies, and let me share my screen so that you have something to look at. All right. So again, the focus of phase 2 is to be able to identify, various strategies that the community could implement over time that would be supporting the improving resilience, whether it be to, again, we discussed utility and transportation corridor or evacuation routes. I know there is a sort of a focus on nature-based infrastructure, which I know that Sunset Beach has already been fairly proactive in implementing nature-based infrastructure. I know that there's been a living shoreline that's been constructed down at the park, and I realize that there's a desire to move forward with expanding that living shoreline. So that is something you guys are already focused on. There's also potential opportunities for green infrastructure, our stormwater improvements. I know that Lisa in the past has mentioned stormwater runoff and improving stormwater infrastructure and infiltration on the island itself around some of the feeder channels. So that is certainly something that could be identified as a potential solution. And then, as the town of Sunset Beach, is well known for, the extensive wetland and marsh system that you have between the Barrier Island and the main island. I know that the town has been deeded several acres of marshland here more recently. So being able to conserve that land for the future, I think, is extremely important and is an opportunity for us, for the town, to look at those types of options. And of course, you mentioned the UDO and the updating the Camera land use plan. So I think that's an opportunity to consider, various policies and regulations with development in some of those more sensitive areas. So I know that in the project portfolio, and certainly we'll update it with the information that we've discovered buried down in our email with the package from the community action team. We will update the project portfolio and share that with you. But some of the items that have already been identified, again, as I mentioned, the sort of just developing an overall feasibility analysis of stormwater or green infrastructure projects that could be implemented, trying to identify where those green infrastructure projects could be best suited based on elevation and drainage, but kind of moving forward into more of a feasibility analysis to be able to move and cite some of those projects. And again, those projects would address flood hazard, trying to make sure that the water is drained as soon as possible off the land, but being able to infiltrate into perhaps some kind of bioswale or wetland system to be able to take up any kind of nutrients or pollutants before it reaches the AIWW or the waterways. So that is one option. And I believe, Chad, Rachel is trying to get back into the meeting, if you don't mind relaying that to the IT staff. In addition, understanding that there's been some past discussions on enhancing some of the waterfront bulkheads. So trying to determine what can be done with some of the hardened structure, whether or not it needs to be retrofitted. Are there opportunities to be able to retrofit them into sort of more of an ecologically friendly way? You know, is there opportunities for living shorelines to be installed seaward of the bulkheads? You know, how can property owners and this town work together to seek out funding and implement improvements to bulkheads to ensure that shoreline stabilization and properties are protected?
Dawn, I'm back in. If you would like a hand, I can take over.
Sure. Yeah, please go for it. We're on the Living Shoreline Expansion Project.
Thank you. I appreciate you taking over for me. Apologies again. I'm not sure what's going on with my technology today. So yeah, moving forward, looking at our next project, one of the potential solutions that we identified is expanding the already existing living shorelines. I know that the town of Sunset Beach constructed approximately 0.2 acres of living shorelines already adjacent to the town park, which you see mapped here on this slide. And the yellow, just as a reference, so we can look at the hazards that this living shoreline is addressing. I wanted to look at storm surge flooding for a major storm, so category 3 storm where we get into a major hurricane. That's what we see here, the yellow. So those are areas around the town of Sunset Beach that will be inundated by floodwaters in the event of a major storm. So it looks like that living shoreline is in a really great location, and it highlights some areas surrounding this already existing living shoreline that may be really beneficial to pursue for an expansion. Next, so shoreline protection. Again, this kind of goes along with some of these other projects that are very similar. I know that the town of Sunset Beach has plans and has had previous discussions already about constructing a living shoreline along Shoreline Drive West in particular, which I have highlighted on our map in this coral color, so we can see where exactly this would be located, right along the Intercoastal Waterway. And this was an idea that was mentioned in the climate change mitigation plan. So I know this was mentioned as a high priority. So this is definitely one that would be great to look into a little bit farther and discuss some potential funding sources moving into phase 3. This one, we don't have a specific map for obvious reasons. This would pertain to the entire town of Sunset Beach. So outreach and education programs can go a long way, not only in obviously educating our community, both in and around the town of Sunset Beach, as well as tourists that visit during the busy tourist season. But it's really important as well for other projects because it really helps to garner public support and awareness for the importance of these projects, the time frame and priorities of some of these other projects. And we did include some specific examples on here in this slide. So one example is we could include developing a rain gutter and downspout promotion plan with educational and financial incentives for community members. So getting into specifics, this is something that can be expanded upon by the town staff based on need and any ongoing plans in terms of outreach and education. And moving into prioritization, I'm going to pass this over to Mike to discuss this a little bit farther.
Great, thank you, Rachel. Let me come back on video. I was trying to help if the video is part of the problem there with our technical issues, but I think I would, can everyone hear me okay again? Just to check.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just to talk a little bit about prioritization of the projects, we were talking about using the criteria. That's something that we had provided an overview of, and talked about doing in terms of looking at these 7 criteria and basically going through a system of scoring and ranking based on these 7 criteria of social, technical, administrative, political, legal, economic, and environmental characteristics of the project. So that is still one option. Another option that we have been considering, and this is based on criteria that is consistent with the handbook. We've recently had some coordination with McKinsey on this. If we want to look at prioritizing these things a little bit differently, maybe a simpler approach, a more timely approach, would be to look at these 6 questions, and we could basically prioritize, sort of assign a ranking of high, moderate, or low based on one of these considerations. If we don't want to go through this, full-blown step-by-step criteria, we could just say this is a high priority because it advances prior efforts. This is a high priority because it does involve social equity, or perhaps it's a low priority because it does not do one of these things. It's a low priority because of capacity to implement. Maybe capacity for that particular project would be low. Resources would be low, and therefore it may be a low priority for that reason. So I guess we're looking for a bit of direction from you in terms of what level of effort you want to do the prioritization. If you had any feeling that the Stapley criteria might be too exhaustive, if you like the idea of basically going through and doing a high, moderate, or low based on these 6 criteria, and we could add criteria to this as well, I believe. Mackenzie, I think you would be open to, for example, another bullet here could be, does it directly address a risk or a vulnerability identified in the risk assessment? It's a high priority because it does directly address this vulnerability. So I guess I would just ask, do you have any preference on moving forward with Stapley, or do you like the idea of maybe this simpler, more streamlined approach to doing the high, moderate, and low?
Mike, in response, and I know I'm not going to be answering your question as you stated it, my personal goal would be to select projects that are attractive to DCM, that help us qualify in, let's call it in their eyes, for grant money, for support, so that we can move forward on those projects. Where it says here on the prioritization PowerPoint that officially ranking them is really not important. I'm going to put a colon there and then ask a question of Moffitt Nichols. Several of the projects that we submitted back in October, had to do with evacuation, had to do with flooding, had to do with the safety of our citizens, but it was dealing with state-controlled roadways. And I guess the question I would ask, are we wasting our time to submit a project through DCM that is a state-maintained roadway that we need to have raised or have a utility fixed, meaning a storm water pipe underneath it, because they would turn around and say, hold it, we can't take resiliency money that the governor has allocated to the towns to help finance a state project that they should be doing on their own. I don't know if that would be a conflict or not with the use of that money. Is there a simple answer to a question like that?
Sure. That's a great question. And Mackenzie, I would almost, not to put you on the spot, but is that something that you would be inclined to reply to in terms of what projects DCM is prioritizing in terms of what you want to see prioritized, but then also how are we coordinating on projects that, because of ownership, are outside of their ownership or jurisdiction if it is NCDOT or CEM or others. Mackenzie, would you like to speak to that?
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
And Mackenzie,
Hey.
I did put it on the slide for your funding update if you want to kind of wrap your response into that as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I did miss part of that question. We are in the state vehicle. We just pulled up to Hertford County for their public meeting this morning. And we were asking for directions, so I missed part of that question, but I'm here now. Is it a question on what type of projects are going to be eligible for phase 3 funding?
Yes.
Okay, so
Well, specifically, Mackenzie, we're talking about, we're very vulnerable here because of state maintained roadways for access and egress and evacuation. Are we wasting our time in putting, an example, the only access to and from our barrier island is through what we call the causeway that is a state maintained road. It needs to be raised a couple of feet so it doesn't flood so often and so that we can evacuate. But are we wasting our time in putting in the raising of a state road in one of our suggested projects? Because I would suspect that they don't want to take resiliency funds and feed it into a state project. It's supposed to be for the town and the community to be able to work within our municipality on our projects.
yes, completely understandable, and that's a great question. That is definitely a project that I think should be included within the project portfolio. And if it's a priority to you guys, maybe higher up in the numbers. But specifically for phase 3 engineering and design funding, we are going to be looking more towards nature-based solutions. But that project seemed great for BRIC, if you guys have looked into FEMA's BRIC program. And part of this RCCP is to also help you find other funding streams. So that's something that if you have listed as a priority within your project portfolio, you can then apply for BRIC funds and say, hey, we went through this resiliency planning process. This was a priority to our community. Here are the maps and things like that. I'm not quite sure how that would rank with our phase 3 funding. I'm sure you could certainly apply. I just don't know if it would be as competitive
So
with
you're
some
saying,
nature-based projects.
you're saying if we want to put the best bang for our buck, we need to be focusing on projects that stand a better chance of meeting the requirements of this DCM project here and apply to other avenues for grants or support on something such as a state maintained roadway raising.
Exactly.
Wow.
And those other types of applications, we're here to help you, find and help in any way we can. I'm definitely not discouraging you for applying for phase 3 funds for that. I would just maybe look for some other projects that aren't so based around infrastructure for our phase 3 funding. There's lots of other money. Go ahead. I was just going to say there's lots of money coming in here soon for infrastructure.
Right. What I might suggest here now is that, sorry, Mackenzie, it's back and forth, but what I might suggest here is that Moffitt Nichols look at our project list, and there's many, many, many projects. I'll bet there's 100 projects on there. And look at which ones they feel are nature-based solutions. I know in your presentation, Rachel, you talked a lot about rain gardens and living shorelines and mentioned nature-based solutions. It seems like that is the key subject that we need to be focused on for the 4, 5, 6 projects that we put together as the results of this RCCP program.
Yes, that sounds correct. But I would definitely still list that bridge project if that is a priority to you guys, especially if that is your main access route, evacuation route. BRIC funding would find that very important.
Yeah, and I guess I would like to add, and I agree with Mackenzie and definitely appreciate your time. And I realize you and Tancred are about to walk into another public meeting, and appreciate you guys being on the call. But I would like to add just to the town, to the community action team, I think the goal really for the risk and vulnerability assessment and the project portfolio is not just to focus on future DCM funds, that are coming forth. I mean, it's really a long-term asset for you to have in your hands to leverage future funds, no matter what they are, whether they are local, state, federal. It's an opportunity for other partners to utilize what you've done here to help leverage. I'm thinking, the North Carolina Coastal Federation, other local partners. This is an opportunity for you to have in your hands something to say that we went through this process together as a community. We identified these hazards, these areas of vulnerability, and these projects as priorities, even if they are stormwater infrastructure, utility, transportation, etc. Because again, as Mackenzie mentioned, there's quite a bit of infrastructure money coming down the line. The state is moving forward with their own resiliency framework. I mean, they being sort of the overall state, federal, they are going to be coming down to the local governments and seeking out who is kind of ready to move to that next step. And you as a community has gotten kind of through that hard first step of walking through that resiliency planning effort. You've already kind of wrapped your minds, you've asked for input, we kind of get those priorities. So I would hate for you to put all your eggs in the basket of what's coming next with phase 3, although I do think that we should be prepared for that. But I also feel like this is the first step of many steps over a very long time frame that the community as a whole can use to continue to fund future implementation efforts for all different types of projects. So again, I agree. I think we should think about strategically what may be, again, a priority from a nature-based infrastructure perspective, and use that as an opportunity to seek funding that we know is coming down the line, but also think more holistically as to making sure that you're prepared for all future funding. So,
excellent point, Don. In fact, we've talked, off record about the fact that we can use this, just like you're saying, as a building block for support, to gain support from our citizens, to make us think about what our hazards are, what our issues are, and do it in advance of the hazard having occurred. And so your points are well taken. But obviously, we need to focus on the timeline here in front of us for this particular program with DCM. And now that you have I don't know that you've had a chance to really look at it, but you have we'll call it projects, but it's an exhaustive list of things all around town. And I'll bet there's 100 of them that we spend quite a bit of time in putting together. If you could look at it and help us determine, help us phrase, help us provide background, help us sell these projects, if you will, as a part of this program. I think that's the immediate step that we need to find out when all this can happen. Is this outside the scope of what you were contemplating?
I think that what I'd like to do, I guess, is go back to, if you have written comments on the risk and vulnerability assessment and can compile those and send those to us. We haven't received your comments yet other than today, so I'd like to understand if there are any revisions that need to be made to the risk and vulnerability assessment. And one of our action items is to make sure that DCM has the draft as well. And then, of course, second is to go back to the CAT agenda packet from October 7th that I now have open in front of me, and include these projects in the project portfolio, send to you that spreadsheet. We are using a template provided by the Division of Coastal Management, which I believe in one of the earlier slides presented by Rachel, you'll see that the items listed here in the bullets is kind of the minimum information needed Again, I know it's not a lot, and we may not have all the answers to these items, especially considering cost and funding sources. We can make some broad estimates at this time, but as far as the scope, it's really to kind of wrap up what we have, integrate sort of the missing information that we now have, and wrap up the resilience strategy memo and help you focus on phase 3 if you so wish to do so. But I think, to more broadly scope out individual projects, I think can be done, but not necessarily within the scope of currently what we have in the phase 1 and phase 2. I think that is absolutely a doable task. But I think at this point, what we want to do is just make sure that these projects are identified so that in the future you can say, hey, look, this, we vetted this, we identified this, and then, move forward into how to expand that and understand what the tasks really are to implement that project.
I'm having difficulty understanding.
Pete, if I could think out loud here a minute. I think Moffitt and Nickel need to look at the feedback we gave them in October of the specific projects that we're concerned about. I know myself, I need to go over this presentation more carefully because I can't read it on the screen. And I had a hard time with the communication of understanding a lot that was said. So I think we need to kind of look at what each other's telling each other and then get back together again for another meeting. We need to see the more detailed report from Moffitt and Nickel, and I need to understand what the way they're approaching their process.
Well, maybe Chad or somebody can add. We have some time fences here, right? So what is the time fences?
Yeah, so I've talked to Dawn.
You need to get to the mic, please.
Oh, am I on?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
Dawn and I've
Just got
talked,
one.
we do have some time constraints. I think we're looking at end of January, a couple weeks in February. Is that right, Dawn?
Yes, that was the intent.
So
Well,
obviously,
when is this risk assessment vulnerability need to be complete? What date? And acceptable to everybody sitting up here. What is that date?
Dawn?
If the report is acceptable to DCM in its format, because John Farrell brought up some very valid points about does the format follow the planning handbook? But if it does, then my main requirement would be that wind damage be added to the hazard identification as 3.4. Now, there can be some verbiage put in to back it up by the fact that we have hurricanes. So that, I think, gets the risk and vulnerability assessment report out of the draft form into the final form. And then what we're talking about is coming up with projects. And I'm very disappointed that we're not talking about specific projects here. I was under the impression that the projects that we had sent you, that you would provide us your input as to which ones you thought. And I know I'm not just trying to think about this program. We're not going to get rid of the project thoughts just because they don't meet this DCM program here now. We're going to continue to think about them in the future with other possibilities. But and we've scoped out in that project list. We've scoped out what the background is on a lot of those projects.
I guess
Again, I'm frustrated.
What I'm trying to get to is what I hear from Dawn at the last thing is send me your comments on the risk and vulnerability assessment. So we have to establish these time constraints. I think all of us up here, if they're looking for our written comments need some sort of time hurdle saying that you got till tomorrow noon to write down your comments, send them all to Chad, and Chad will put them into one document and send them to Dawn. And then they're going to have X amount of time to come back with a revision, whether that's 5 days or 7 days or 10 days. I mean, you're working from a deadline. You got to work back and build all these mileposts that have to be in the project plan. So, I mean, that's what I want to know. We got X amount of time to give them our comments. My feeling, it's got to be tomorrow by noon or the end of the day. And they got X amount of time to send us the revision. And then we got X amount of time to make a final comment because that end date is there someplace. I don't know, what is that end? Did it end up February 15th? Then we got to figure out what the mileposts are to get there. We need to do that now.
May I add?
John?
One of the things that I don't have a clear understanding on, based on your scope of work given us early, is when do we get the project portfolios that outlines the options aimed at reducing the exposure, reducing sensitivity, and increasing adaptive capacity to flooding and other hazards? I interpret that to be the portfolios for what you think are the good projects that we should be pushing forward. If I understand that correctly. I'm not sure if I understand that correctly.
Yeah, the portfolio is a spreadsheet with a tab for each project, and we will integrate the additional projects that were in the October 7th agenda packet. So we will update that immediately and get that to you early next week for your review. Again, as Mike had mentioned, with regards to prioritizing those projects, that is sort of a ranking that we can discuss further. We can base it off of where those projects are located within sort of the risk hazard analysis. They could also be ranked upon, whether or not they are nature-based or gray infrastructure, if we want to focus on just those that are nature-based. So again, from the community action team's perspective, we would look to you to tell us where you think, the priorities of the community are. We can continue to suggest projects, but at this point, we'll collate what we've been provided and provide you with the spreadsheet to review. And that would be the project portfolio.
Would it be fair to say, Don, though, that if there are projects that probably don't qualify or don't rank very high in DCM's eyes, like the state route raising that we talked about with our causeway, that those should not be put on this spreadsheet, because all that's going to do is make us draw a line through it. If you think there's something as our consultant that would be easier to sell, if you will, in the program, then that's what I'd like to hear from Moffitt Nichols, is that they would suggest that these would probably get high ranking within within DCM. Maybe you don't want to do it that way, or don't want to go there.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't see the project portfolio serving as a way to be competitive within DCM. The phase 3 application, and I don't know, I guess, Mackenzie, if you're still on and want to address this, I think the project portfolio should encompass all different types of projects, not necessarily focus on those that are going to receive funding from DCM in phase 3. That phase 3 application is a separate application. I don't know what's required of it. I haven't seen it. I don't know what DCM will ask. But I would imagine they're going to ask the town or the communities to submit an application for a specific project. And it doesn't, and again, Mackenzie, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think they're going to go back and look at your project portfolio and say, well, gosh, you had all these other infrastructure projects, and they're going to use that as a criteria against you. Maybe, Mackenzie, can you speak to the phase 3 a little bit further?
Hey, Don. Yeah, you spoke correctly about the project portfolio. Our intent is for that to be a useful document and tool for the town to have on file. So as this money starts coming in this year from all different kinds of sources, you can go to this template that they're going to create, Moffett and Nichols going to create for you, and say, hey, there's that project we were talking about. It's prioritized, and that's what grant funders are looking for, is that you've been through this process and you've already, kind of scoped out what you want to do. And it doesn't just have to be 5 projects. It can be as many as you want. The planning handbook just suggests that each community provides at least 5 projects, and just one of them has to be nature-based. So that they could be other types of hybrid projects, anything with stormwater infrastructure, anything that is just going to reduce your vulnerability to your hazards addressed. In terms of phase 3, we've got that application draft with the state purchasing office right now for their review. So hopefully we don't have any hiccups this time around with contracting and things. So we're hoping to get that application posted here in the next 2 weeks. And that phase 3 is going to fund the engineering and design of one of these prioritized projects. So, I think what we're going to do is be able to allow you to submit more than one project if you would like, but what we are going to be looking for is that the project that you push forward has been prioritized. And just that, you as a community said, this is something we want done. It's going to reduce, this hazard and those kinds of things. I can't speak too much about the applications as it's not posted yet, but that will be coming out soon. And then I will be available, I'm sure, for many questions from many communities. So you can just call me and we can set up a call to discuss that. But I do have to run into this other meeting soon. So is there any other questions anybody has for me while I'm on the line?
Dawn, if I can make a recommendation to you all and to this committee, I think you have heard clearly that this committee is going to require some high wind provisions or paragraphs or whatever in this resiliency and risk assessment. So that's your focus, is to get that into this risk assessment quickly. In the meantime, I recommend that this committee work with staff to prioritize your list of projects. You will be able to come to an educated guesstimate with staff levels such as Dustin Graham, who deals a lot with the living shorelines. And we are already on task for a second living shoreline project. We are waiting on CAMA right now for permitting for that going forward. So staff can help you with those projects, prioritizing those while they do this. I suggest you all come back together in a week for them to have their side of it done and for us to have those projects prioritized.
I would think their side should still include the spreadsheet that they're going to do based on all the information that we have given Moffett and Nichols.
I agree, but they're not from the community. They can't look at our project list and say this one ranks more than that one. That's something that we need to do on this level.
Yeah. Right, but I agree with John. I think we kind of, maybe I missed it. I've not seen that template. We probably should have started with the template and then filled it in. So I agree, they should at least send us the template, whether it's filled out with some projects or not, so we know the questions we're trying to answer. I mean, we all, the little groups, came up with our own templates, and now it's not going to fit their template, so they're going to struggle. I understand their problem. So they should at least send us, I agree with, as John said, their template with what they got or think they got, and then we can either add or subtract from it using the format that's appropriate.
Is the template a project template?
I think that's what she said. It's a project portfolio template, isn't it? And
Yeah.
setting the priorities.
It's a template we received from the Division of Coastal Management, and we can send that to you. We'll update it using the information you received in that October packet, and then get it over to you. I think we should probably be able to do it in the next day or two and get it to you over by Monday for your review.
Okay, well, if you can get it to us like tomorrow, Dustin and Chad and I can sit down and start looking at these projects to get them put together, because with the time frame of February 28th being the deadline, we've got to move quick. So we can't wait days. We've got to wait maybe 24 hours. And then send us this template. We can start working on that from this side of the table as well.
Well, and also, Ms. Anglin, the CAT, we have our lists. We could sit down with the information that we've been gleaning since October. We can better select the projects because we were just throwing everything against the wall to see what would stick.
Right.
Because we were independent groups.
Right.
And now that we have everybody's stuff, we can do that. But you're suggesting a meeting next Thursday.
I am.
Is this an Excel template, Don? Yeah, so, I mean, I certainly can move our stuff to that, because mine's ours, and John already put in Excel, so I could just
Well,
move it
the
around.
one that John Corbett and I did, we can put it on a template too. If we have the format, we can then download it into that format.
Well, we will do that. We already have the project portfolio started. So we will do that and send it to you, and then you're more than welcome to add to it. Again, it'll have the criteria, the minimum criteria that DCM is requesting at this time. Again, we are not scoped to completely identify all phases of a particular project. It's really just to identify projects that could be moved forward with future funding at this time. That's what you want, is a kind of a project portfolio with a list of projects in the event that 5 years from now you want to revisit and look back through, and there they are. So that's kind of what the goal of having that project portfolio.
So you're going to digest the stuff that we sent you, and then what you send us. We want the template as soon as possible, but and I guess I'm getting semantics confused here. What you're going to send us on Monday is a regurgitation of all the projects we sent you.
Yes.
Okay.
Hey, this is Mackenzie. And the template that Moffitt and Nickel is working on can be found in the planning handbook on page 26. It's phase 2, step 2. If you just want to be looking at that while you're waiting for them to shoot that over to you, that's kind of what they've been going off of, where it's a big table that says project name, project description, hazard addressed by the project, things like that. And then I also did want to mention, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Golden Leaf. They've got a webinar February 1st. They've got some funding coming in. Let me pull that up, for their flood mitigation program. It looks like they're going to be awarding up to $250,000. I know this is off topic a little bit, but not in terms of of funding. So if anyone is interested in that webinar, I'll be on it myself, and I can send you that link. And that can also be something that, while you're prioritizing these projects, can be looking for that program too. So that's just kind of what me and Tancred are doing. Is helping you guys find all different kinds of funding sources. So I just wanted to jump in and mention that before I forgot.
Okay. Thank you, Mackenzie. If you could send that link to our town staff, they can distribute it to us on the CAT here.
Okay, great. Yeah, we'll be on that one as well. So, and I'm sorry, I do have to go into this meeting. But does anyone have anything for me, or feel free to email me or call me after this meeting?
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, and good luck with your next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
You too. Lisa and Chad, I believe that was sort of kind of the topics. I know that you guys have already been meeting for quite a bit, so it sounds like receiving the comments from the community action team on the risk and vulnerability assessment, we'll integrate those, provide an updated report, and then also we will provide you with the project portfolio spreadsheet for the CAT and staff's review and revisions.
And are you available to meet next Thursday at 9 a.m.? Are you all available?
Hold on.
Sybil is not. She won't be in town.
Dawn, we'll throw you some dates and an email and get this next meeting scheduled as quickly as we can.
The 20th? No.
20th. You're not available?
Nope.
We've got some members that aren't available, so we'll.
Yeah, and And Lisa, I'm happy to receive, comments via email. Again, I know Chad mentioned in our last conversation, trying to get this wrapped up as quickly as possible in early February. So again, this is going to be a living document. This project portfolio is meant to continue on within the community. So again, it doesn't necessarily have to be finalized. DCM isn't going to be grading it by any means. It's something the community can have for its use.
Correct. That's the way I see it as well. All right.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And then look forward to making these revisions and getting everything finalized.
Thanks, Don.
Right.
Pete,
All
thank
right,
you for letting her go.
I believe that is the conclusion of our number 3 under new business for steps moving forward. I think we all are in agreement as to what we need to do. I might submit, Chad, do you want each one of us to write our comments down about this? I think Ms. Anglin summarized it very clearly, that we are all willing to accept the report, the assessment, provided that item 3.4 is added for high wind as a hazard.
If you want to provide me with your comments, just kind of in a Word document, some kind of document, I'll consolidate them.
Yeah.
Or if
I think we should all
and then I can forward it to Dawn.
send that to Chad by tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
Whether we all have the same one item on it,
Yeah.
or some other small items on it.
Yep.
Do you want it in a Word doc? Do you want it just in the email format? What do you prefer?
A Word document would be great.
Okay.
Chad, would you provide us with the PDF of their presentation?
Yes.
Yeah, so all of us by tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock.
By noontime tomorrow?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
You want each of our lists of priorities?
Any
No.
changes you want to this report?
Comments on the assessment report.
Oh, okay.
Or none. If you put none, then just tell him
Yeah.
none, so he knows he gets something from all of us.
It's comments on this report, the draft of this report,
Oh,
not a list of projects,
oh.
not
Just-
project specific.
I've already-
And some of them could be just restatements of what we said today, if you want to funnel that down to a more cohesive thought, so Moffett might have an easier time incorporating the changes, so try to be concise and direct and put in a thought as opposed to just talking thoughts, written thoughts that Chad can put all together in one and send it to them so they have it.
Dawn, I'll have that to you tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care, everybody. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you, Don.
Continuing on with the meeting, we've all agreed that we're going to have by noontime tomorrow our written comments in Word document form into Chad so that he can collate them and then send it into Moffett and Nichols.
All right, just so I'm clear. We've talked about a lot of things here, and we've focused on the need for more detailed input to this report. Are we backing off from that now and
Well,
trying to broaden this to include some other things that were omitted, like wind?
I asked the question specifically to the DCM representative that was on the meeting. And she said, Mackenzie said, she believes that wind hazard should be included in the report.
Okay, but
I
Mackenzie.
also said, let me just finish there, please, John. I also said we wanted to make sure that the format of the report was going to be acceptable to DCM. And she did not respond indicating that there was a required format.
She did say she was going to review it.
Yes.
She hadn't even reviewed it to
Correct.
see if
Okay,
it
you're right.
met the
You're right.
requirements
Well,
of.
Dawn did say they would make sure it was compliant.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, whether
Okay.
that means they're going to take a second look at it or talk to DCM, but she did I heard clearly say, we will make sure it's compliant.
Well, one of my comments then I'm going to submit to you is going to be to have Moffett Nichols make sure that this report format is compliant with DCM. That
Right,
it does
they
not
need-
appear that it
right.
follows the planning handbook. And you guys can repeat that same thing in your response
Right.
back to Chad.
Because
Because we have to cover ourselves for that.
I kind of heard from Mackenzie, there's things in the handbook, and then she said it's a guideline, which means there's things in the handbook that are important and, the must-haves, and then there's a group probably of nice-to-haves that are in the structure. So she knows, or they know, what they must have, and hopefully they're communicating that with Moffitt and Nichols. So yes, I agree. One of our comment is it must be DCM compliant, whatever that is. And I guess they agree to fix it if it ain't, even if it's past the 28th.
With respect to, I know, Ms. Anglin, you were talking about getting up with Dustin Graham, and all of, obviously that's extremely important. And I know some of us did as well as we were making up our list of projects. Am I correct in assuming that meeting outside of chambers like this still has to follow open meeting laws, or is this really an ad hoc committee that doesn't have to follow closed meeting rules?
No, but you have to follow open meeting laws.
Okay.
Yes.
And a lot of that has to deal with that. This is made up of planning board. So planning board has quorum, and then one member of ERC and one member of the town council. So
He's right.
Okay. So even though only 3 of us can make next Thursday, we can't, well, we could have the meeting anyway. Well, we wouldn't have a quorum.
we'll throw out some, I don't know what quorum rules look like as far as a committee.
But do you have all your calendars with you?
Yes.
Yeah.
If you do, pick another day. I just threw Thursday up to see what would stick. It doesn't have to be Thursday.
I'm completely out Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. I'm teaching a
Well,
class.
I'm out the whole week.
Okay.
We're going out of town tomorrow.
Okay.
So-
Look at Monday.
Monday the 17th, town staff is off. 19th is ERC. When
Well,
you won't
Sybil
work.
just said she's out all next week. So
That's
go to the
fine.
next
So
one.
24th through the 28th.
24th is okay.
Not for me.
The only day I can't make it the following week is Tuesday.
So the 26th or the
24th,
27th.
26th, 27th, 28th I can make.
Does the 26th work for everybody, or does the 27th work for everybody?
Both work.
I'm good for both.
I'm good for either.
26.
26. 26 is best.
Just do the 26th.
I'm not
that
here
week.
on the 26th, but that
So
doesn't matter.
the
You can pull
27th.
Dustin in.
I will
do
do the
27th.
27th. So 2 weeks from today.
You're here on the 27th?
Mhm.
No? You're not, John.
Well,
Well, I think
what time are we starting?
why can't we,
Whatever
at this
time
point,
you
why
can
don't we
do it.
make it hold open 26th and 27th? Because you need to talk to Dawn to see if
Right.
she's available.
26th,
So
27th.
in my mind, I'm going to keep the 26th
Do
and
we want
27th
Dawn
open.
in that meeting?
I was going to suggest that it just be you all and staff, because what we need
I
to
don't think we
focus
need it.
on is
Okay.
this project
Okay.
list,
I mean, what do you think?
so that we can prioritize
Yeah,
it, and
not
then
Dawn.
we can check the boxes.
Okay. So 26th, 27th, we're saying 27th, but if there's a change, we're all available for the 26th,
And
correct?
you say you could possibly make the 27th.
I can make the 27th after 9:30. 9:30 or later.
Okay.
10 o'clock.
10 o'clock, 27th?
Okay. Town staff, I'll pull Dustin in. Lisa will be here.
Mm-hmm.
And you're back, Sybil, right?
Yeah, oh yes,
Okay.
I'll be back the end of next
Is that
week.
are we burning 2 weeks?
I think
I know.
at that point we will have the correction draft of the risk vulnerability assessment from Dawn. We will also have the project submittal list.
But that's going to have nothing to do with what we are looking at projects.
Correct. So at that point we will be, okay, can we give Dawn and Moffitt Nickel the okay to take this to DCM for approval? Are we good with this living document that will now be the town of Sunset Beaches? Then our focus, I mean, that's probably 10% of our focus. And that rest of the 90% of the focus is prioritizing the project lists to submit back to Dawn is like, hey, these are what we want to go with.
But we don't
Yes,
even have to
correct.
have a formula for the prioritization. It can
Correct.
be input from Lisa, it
But
can
I
be
will
input
also-
from Dustin, it can be
Yeah.
input from us.
Yes, I will
Yeah.
also say this. Don't take something out, don't because you think that DCM might not grant funding.
Yeah, but
for it.
we want to make sure that the projects are on there that we
Sure.
think can
Mhm.
qualify.
Yes,
Mhm.
but also there's other funding availability out there outside the broad spectrum of DCM.
I understand that, but
Okay.
we're focused on this funding right now.
Right.
Did we write off the 21st, next for a week from tomorrow? As a no, we can't do the date?
We have two won't be here.
Right.
Yeah,
And
On
you
the
need
20,
three.
on Friday, the 21st. I know Sybil's not going to be here, but we may never find a date that,
I'm out Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
oh,
next
Friday you
week.
can't do it.
So
Okay,
the
never
20
mind. Never mind. I just was trying to rush it into next week as opposed to
I'm sorry.
waiting another one. Well, it doesn't, you're a volunteer.
Yes, I am.
Mhm.
All right.
And if you want to send your list, and then as long as you have a quorum, the ones that aren't here can maybe go back and view the YouTube at your convenience. And then when we meet again on the 27th, it would be more to finalize that project list.
Do we need a quorum of this group or a quorum of the planning board?
Quorum of this group.
Okay.
So that would be 3 out of 5.
Hmm.
It isn't, I thought I had heard you say we needed, the planning board started it, and then we brought 2 other members on, so the planning board had to have a quorum.
Constitutes a
That's
Open
the open
meeting.
meeting. That's where the open meeting law comes in.
All right.
So if
We can informally get together with one-on-one
Mhm.
and do some background on this prior to the 27th.
Mhm.
yes.
Okay, 10 a.m. the 27th.
Got it.
and you can schedule appointments with us individually. I mean, us collectively and y'all individually.
Yes, yes. Well, and we kind of did that,
Mhm.
coming up with our list in the first place. We didn't get with you, but we got with all of your department heads.
Yeah, I think
Right.
I'm thinking about something else.
And Dustin and I have, we have a lot of history with working with grants and grant applications and what will fly, what will not for projects for grant
Okay.
funding.
And that was what I wanted Moffett Nichols to at least give us some, I don't want to say earn their keep, but
Mhm.
that's what I thought their role was, is to provide us guidance so that we could, because they're only looking at this project, not, or at this.
Yeah, they're looking at
Form.
this program that they have been awarded through the state,
Yes.
and the state's paying them. So it's a very broad, general overview. But we're getting in the weeds, which we need to because council needs to budget and we need to apply for grants, all the grants that we can find. So, but the resiliency program itself is their focus, and it's a broad scope.
Well, off the record, my
You're on the record.
You're on the record.
on the record, my focus immediately is going to be to take our lists that we have, all of our lists, and go through it and
Is there one?
Turn it into projects.
yes.
Just, that's real simple. Turn
Yep.
it into projects.
Absolutely.
Did you send us the composite package of materials?
Individually, we did.
We
I don't have.
individually get, I don't know if there was one. I have everybody's.
I have everybody's.
I have
because I got them
everybody's.
individually.
I'll have to go back and find it. It's been since October, so I'm
Yeah.
going to go back and find that email I sent to Dawn. And I'll
Yeah.
forward it.
All right, that'd be good.
Look at your
resend that.
October 7th package.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's
I'll
got
try.
all of the inputs that we
Yeah,
made.
so I'll go
And
back
that's
forward
online
that
as well.
to you. Yeah.
That package is on
One
the
final
website.
comment I have, I guess, and this really maybe for John's and Lisa's benefit. I would like the council to, whatever deliberate take up, of creating some sort of cross-functional standing committee task force, either merging of the planning board and the ERC, the staff and some other board, or a whole new group of people. To me, this mitigation and hazard resiliency is a very important government function locally. And there's all these pros that make this a permanent something, task force, board, committee, I don't know what you guys call them. But I think the council needs to look at that and say, it will be a continuous, ongoing, forever function of either some merging of these boards, committees, or a whole new group of people that work on this constantly.
Yeah.
You're
Now,
exactly right.
my view is
That
we,
doesn't
we,
end
we
now.
need to hit this immediate project up until February. And then we need to look at the continuity issue to address the future.
Are you
Mr. Corbett-
talking about to update these project plans that we have in
Well,
place?
we
the
had
hazard
that,
mitigation, land
we
use,
had
and all
that southeast mitigation thing, okay, which if you look at Sunset Beach's participation in that was weak, okay? And we
were
got
in-
this resiliency planning thing,
right, and we were
okay,
in
which we're
staff
trying to get to
changes
some
at
point,
that
yes.
point.
but to me, it sounds like this is really just like the planning board is a that there needs to be a structure that continually looks at hazard mitigation, hazard planning, resiliency on an ongoing permanent basis, and whatever funding or whatever it takes to create that. To me, I think that it's an important function of the town government and shouldn't make it a formal, whatever that is. You guys know better than I do what that is, as opposed to we end this now in February. I think, John, we end this on February 28th, and then we don't worry about it until maybe there's another state program or. But if we're always doing this, we're always ready for the next program, the next grant, the next whatever, because it's an ongoing.
That's not exactly what I said. I said
Oh,
we
okay,
get
sorry.
we get through the 28th,
Right.
and then we make sure then we address how we handle that continuity. I mean, and whether it's going to be one of our existing bodies handle it, whether it's going to be a combination, whether we're going to recruit other people to do it.
Right. That needs to be
But
decided.
then a core existing body to handle hazard mitigation for the
Because the
future.
other thing I'll add to that is that, come February, I mean, from the time we get this project submittal done, we close this part out, move into step 3 and 4. That's what the town wants to do. I know I've vocalized this to Lisa, but, John, you're fully aware of this as well, is that we move into budget season. And I think we're starting to hit that, timing that hopefully perfectly where we look at next year's budget and start implementing what this looks like as well.
Yep.
If we can.
Yep.
But we also have a great finance director as well, where she's good at making, what do you call it, budget amendments.
She's busy
So-
printing money.
Well, I guess all I'm saying is that I strongly would like to see the council or the town create some sort of ongoing formal process that addresses hazard mitigation, risk assessment, and resiliency for the town of Sunset Beach.
And the council pretty much informally does that by their funding of projects every budget season. But you're exactly right. The hazard mitigation plan, once the state did away with the requirement that it be updated every 5 years, it probably hadn't been updated in
What document?
hazard mitigation plan.
That's how we just adopted the Southeastern Hazard Mitigation.
No, I mean our own.
Yeah. I think
12?
Yeah, something like
Is
that.
that
so.
Well, we
2012?
adopted the southeastern one, but the Sunset Beach portion of that in those tables was,
Yeah.
let's just say thin.
right?
As were all the other coastal towns.
Yes.
Everybody piggybacked up on Brunswick County,
Well, the fact that
which
the fact that it's a 5-county program now, I think weakens our focus on ourselves. And because we're kind of just letting somebody else do it. And we talked at one of our planning board meetings about a specific route to that. And it's what John just said now about establishing something with some input from a couple of citizens to join it. Maybe it's a combination of the ERC, something like that. But I agree with you, Ron. We can't just let it die. It's important.
But it definitely can't be the planning board
No,
Correct.
because y'all are too busy. You've got too much on your plate right
Right.
now.
it
that-
could be some hybrid or something, I don't know.
Can I assume that that is number 4, staff comments have
Yes.
been completed?
Yeah.
Any other comments from members of the planning board? And, excuse me, members of the CAT group?
not for me.
Motion to close.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting